Our next speaker, Nathan Okonta, is a PhD student at York University. He's a community activist and researcher. He's studying the links between schools and prisons, and he's going to share his perspective and history as well. Nathan.
Thank you. It is actually it is wonderful to be here, I see so many familiar faces, many of whom I haven't seen a very long time. Some of you, I hope that before the end of today, or end of tonight's event, that I will get to know more about who you are, what brought you here, and how we can potentially work together. I am obviously, as Lana talked about, an activist in the community, been organizing here in Toronto for a bit of time, for a couple of years now. But it was really very pleasing this morning to read in the papers that we are not a Ford nation. Toronto is not a Ford city, irrespective of what Mr. Ford and his friends will want us to believe. I believe that these achievements, specifically I'm talking about the achievements that were made, with respect to the budget last night to be more precise, the fact that all the shenanigans of Mr. Ford and his friends, he was disappointed at the end of it, I believe. I am very proud to call myself a Torontonian. It's also very indicative of what it is that is needed or necessary for us to permanently defeat Mr. Ford and move federally to defeat Mr. Harper.
Yes.
It shows, I believe, with respect to Occupy Toronto, the type of approach that has to happen in order for us to have the necessary and required movement and organizing that will permanently shift and return our government to us. I hope that I will, by the end of my talk about some additions that could be made to this particular approach, especially with respect to it being more inclusive in its constituency, in its approach, in recognizing that in Toronto we have other communities that are not here. We have to start to think about how we can move these types of gatherings outside of the downtown core to include the suburbs, the Scarboroughs, the North Yorks, the East Yorks, the Etobicoke. Because with the election of Ford, it is now very obvious to all of us that in order to defeat individuals like him, who are bent on rewarding corporate greed, fighting unions, polarizing our societies, victimizing the already victimized, we need to organize across. Because it's only through such organizing that we can have the movement and the awareness to defeat permanently Mr. Ford. I am going to talk very briefly, hoping that by the end of my talk, or by the time that the questions start coming in, that we'll get to open up some of the concepts that I would drop here, or some of the concepts, or some of the ideas that I will be talking about in a more precise and hopefully more specific ways. I want to talk about the austerity agenda of Mr. Ford, right? But I want to begin that talk by reminding us that for the past 33 years, we have had austerity measures. The agendas of our government have been about forcing down our throats. Austerity measures. Starting with Margaret Thatcher in the UK, through Ronald Reagan in the US, through Mulroney here in Canada, and obviously Mike Harris. We all remember Mike Harris. And now we have Ford. And when you look at Ford's agenda and look at the politics of Ford's agenda, we begin to see the hallmarks of Mike Harris. That this Mr. Ford is actually a return of Mike Harris. And we need to be aware of that, because we do remember, because the remnants of Mr. Harris's policies are still very much with us. We cannot afford 8 years of Mr. Ford. He may be a nice man, I don't care, but with respect to the city of Toronto in the 21st century, you cannot afford him. He is just too expensive. It's expensive for our health, it's expensive for our pocket, it's expensive for our mental health, mental state. Every time I wake up, I remember that we have Mayor Ford. I cringe. Not because I don't like the man, but because he's just just bad news all around. We have to remember this particular agenda and understand what it means. What does Ford want to happen? The austerity agenda means a move away from collective responsibility to individual responsibility. Mr. Ford calls it tough love. What Mr. Ford doesn't often tell us is that there's a flip side of that tough love coin, which is the soft love that Mr. Ford has for very greedy business people. The soft love that we should call, or should be calling, the gravy train, that continuously move from the public domain, from the public commonwealth, into private individual hands, the 1%. That's what it means. It means also moving from a social state, government or city council, to one that is very punitive and punishing. Punishing mostly the very people who are already on the bottom of our society, the marginalized. Those who are often ill-equipped to resist. Those who are often so preoccupied with meeting the basic necessities of life that to imagine being in this type of a space is a luxury. Not because what does transpire in this type of space or spaces is not to the benefit. But the day-to-day struggle of life prevents them from coming. You have to understand that. So doing this, organizing around this, is not a fanciful thing to do because we want to do it. It is a necessity. A necessity not only for ourselves, but for those who cannot do it for themselves. What further does the fourth agenda mean? It means the polarization of our communities into those that their need or needs deserve empathy from us, as compared to those who do not, or whose needs do not deserve empathy from us. And we do know who those people are. They are often women, young children, whom the current budget chief tells us uses their welfare money to buy alcohol or booze. Use their welfare checks to buy cell phones. Reading about this, I was made to imagine having this particular man to survive for a month with whatever it is that is the welfare money. And I can almost guarantee you that he cannot survive it. That type of talk is geared towards suggesting to us that such mothers, of course it's a lie. We all know that he's lying because it doesn't happen. That's a myth created by Mike Harris many years ago. It is a myth that the current council is using, but we have to show them that that's a lie. By one, understanding the needs of such individuals. Others that are often included are young people that the media will tell us that society needs to be protected from them. They're dangerous individuals. They are prone to violence and every other negative attributions and characterizations. I have been working with such individuals for a very long time, and I can guarantee you it's all lies. We also have racialized communities that are often included in the categories of undeserving. Some of them have recently arrived in Toronto. Some of them do not have any legal status here in Canada, struggling to make ends meet. These are often the communities that are removed, or that individuals like Mr. Ford will want us to not consider as socially deserving of our empathy. We also, for those of us who live in downtown, have the Aboriginals, whom, it seems, are only fit to be in our jails. The incarceration rate for the Aboriginal community is very high, significantly higher than most other communities. In short, the types of politics that Ford wants to play is the one that continuously want to punish those in the margins of our society. And we cannot allow Mr. Ford and his council to do such. The austerity agenda often also means moving away from, and this is very important, from progressive policies that it has taken many years of struggle to achieve. Such policies like employment equity policies, environmental policies, those are the policies that are forced to go under such a regime. And of course, I cannot move away from this particular section without talking about that under such a regime, there's always a part of the government that keeps increasing, which is police. That under such regime, in order to manage the disasters that they have created, they often resort to creating more punitive state control agents, the police. We see them trawling our communities, catching and releasing our young people. We see them in our schools now. It is so normalized that to walk into a school, a high school, for example, it is okay to see a police officer. I don't think that there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong with that. In their communities, they see the cops 24/7. And in their schools, they are confronted with the same type of control agents. How and why wouldn't that cause some form of psychosis in the minds of these young people? So in looking and understanding the type of responsibility that we all owe each other, we need to understand those needs. And we need to understand those needs in order to incorporate those needs into our organizing. We need to understand those needs and incorporate them into our organizing because we want to be able to include them, not just by making references to them, but by making them part and parcel of our initiatives. So fighting Ford and his friends mean fighting inequalities in our society. It means recognizing that the Ford agenda will impact different people differently. And it means giving voice to those other people. So Occupy Toronto and the whole global Occupy movement, obviously, we have to recognize the efforts that they have put into this in achieving the results that we have achieved so far. And I hope that the results will keep coming. But we have to move from that, or move beyond that. Not move from that, but move beyond that. We have to start articulating alternatives. Such alternatives could include revolutionary democracy. Democracy that is based on full participation and action. An action that is going to be, or that has to be, very inclusive. It means, again, as I had referenced earlier at the beginning of my talk, moving these types of gathering into other communities. Because, as I said before, to defeat Mr. Ford, this is going to be a collective and consistent and sustained effort. Thank you very much.